It's been 14 years since we last had a Final Destination film. The last film arguably was among the strongest of the franchise in both characterization and tone. Miles Fisher is probably my favorite lead out of any of the Final Destination protagonists. He's just a really compelling character, and let's be honest, the bar isn't that high when it comes to characterization in these movies. But also, most of the side characters felt so much less one-dimensional, which is a great bonus. And the only one that felt like a caricature did a really good job of delivering that performance. The kills themselves, while still having that awful 3D effect, were still really fun and creative. I mean, you can never see gymnastics the same way after watching the movie. However, the genre looks quite different than when it did back in 2011. Generally speaking, that's not a huge amount of time. However, since then, the genre has made some massive shifts in direction in terms of intentionality, themes, and so much more that it's unrecognizable from what it looked like in the 2010s. Every era obviously has its fans and its naysayers, but Final Destination 5 felt like it fit right at home with the rest of the zeitgeist from that era. So I wondered if whenever this franchise got revisited, because inevitably we always come back to franchise stuff, how would it go about making the film feel relevant and fresh and not just be a relic of the past that we just don't know how to let go of? How would it fare against a lot of the more purposeful and thematically resonant movies that we're kind of obsessed with now? Would it even work or just be a big turd stain on the legacy franchise, especially with how strong Final Destination 5 ended off on? While it's independent of the film itself, I adore gimmicks in horror, and so I think the marketing for this film was great. They had those funny billboards and those log trucks driving around, triggering fans' PTSD. I think it's so fun when horror does stuff like that. So Bloodlines follows a family whose Nana escaped death in the past, but now death has found her family and is hellbent on eliminating every family member in an attempt to erase an entire bloodline that should have never existed. Structurally, the film plays it very safe. The film is aware of the checklist that needs to be completed for this to feel like a Final Destination movie. True to its own established formula, as the premise suggests, this film does follow a familiar pattern that you'd expect from an entry in this franchise. The opening premonition, which is usually the grandest, most epic moment in each film that essentially provides the information you will need to figure out what's the order that these characters will be eliminated in, is as large in scale as you'd hope for. It's absolute madness and chaos, and there's usually some extra details in the moment that also allow the viewer to speculate how the movie will throw in a wrench in the plot so it doesn't feel too straightforward and obvious. I think Bloodlines' premonition was very well done. It's a nail-biter for sure, and the concept was awesome. It's just a shame that the effects look really weird, especially with that gloss filter on it, but I think it still earns its title with that sequence. Also, while a lot of the movie is still very formulaic, the movie's at its best when you realize how death was evaded for so long. It basically transcended generations. There's an allegory for you right there. Generational trauma. Although it's not really explored that much, but you can see how the entry tried to evolve a bit. Zach and Adam understood that creating a memorable installment in a franchise with so many entries is no easy challenge. If the mission is to try and stand out among the rest, this is a good start. It's a very fresh and topical theme to approach that they made work within the context of the story, especially when considering that you could very easily argue that the reason that they stopped making a new entry every few years is because of how dried up these movies started feeling. There was no gas left for new ideas outside of new kills, very similar to another franchise that needed a buffer to reinvent itself, and now look at it. And on the topic of kills, these are some of the best of the entire franchise, with the caveat that there's some weird CGI, but these are gnarly and grotesque. You feel squeamish for most of these sequences because of how outrageous they are, and there's a healthy dose of originality while also paying homage to various iconic kills in the series. Hospitals, hospitals, hospitals. They're always inherently scary and creepy, and boy does this movie vindicate that feeling. It delivers some wild carnage eye candy. Another standout aspect of the film is how they handled the William Bloodworth encounter. The late great Tony Todd probably gets a highlight moment in the film where it's like the franchise heard the criticism of his lack of relevance or importance, so he's given probably the most powerful and kind of eerie monologue because of how meta it felt, because it was just so emotional and beautiful, so much so that it almost broke the fourth wall. Yes, he was talking to the characters, but he was also talking to the audience as well. And combined with the sentimental and almost angelic-like music, it's definitely a tearjerker. Easy standout moment from the king, Mr. Tony Todd. And come on, the fact that the last shot of the film ended the way it did was obviously to punctuate a wink to the fans of the series, which was awesome and outrageous. I think the most conflicting part of the film for me was basically how the characters were handled. The performances are good for the most part, and the script tries to give them more texture to be easier to resonate with as the viewer. Pacing wise, this is one of the slowest in the franchise because it tries to dedicate time in between kills to really flesh out these relationships. But if you're expecting them to successfully make you care for these characters,
denied, sit down.
It just doesn't work. It struggles to make these characters actually connect with you, so you're left unsatisfied in terms of bonding with these characters. Outside of maybe Eric and Bobby, that relationship admittedly was kinda cute. But you're also left unsatisfied in feeling that paranoia that these movies always excelled at with no effort. And that's because the movies were relentlessly rushing to the next kill, and it worked. And there is a version of this movie where you get good characterization and a compelling story that makes you feel the loss of these characters as they inevitably die. There's plenty of moments where it felt like they had the right idea, but they didn't finish the thought. Like an easy example is I thought Charlie having a tenuous relationship with Steph at first, and then showing how much of a stronger relationship he has with Julia was gonna mean something. I thought we were gonna explore Steph's dislike for not being so present in her family's lives, and she was gonna clash with Julia because of that. Maybe it would lead to a confrontation. But no, Charlie and Julia show a strong relationship for like one scene, and that's kind of the last time they talk, which is kind of bizarre. Howard and Darlene's relationship was another missed opportunity because while they did have a good heart-to-heart moment, I thought that it was gonna leave a lasting impact on Darlene because he was the main one to try and keep her from being ostracized. But after that moment, she never really mentioned him again. That relationship just felt underwritten and almost forgotten about. Side note, I will say this movie knows how to write an annoying character that you just want to have like the worst death, and then it gives you that catharsis that you desired in spades. Because most likely, that character will get an insanely violent death. And I did enjoy the movie, it's a lot of fun. I just wish it was a little bit more polished and clear in what it's trying to do with the family. The real downfall of the movie is despite the kills feeling intense and creative, some of them just looked too ugly to ignore. There's always been a level of agreement and evenness in the series where they blended CG with practical, and it seemed much more one-sided this time around. It's difficult to juggle wanting that more comedic tone where the movie says, look how funny this kill is because of how insane it is, and there's definitely entertainment value in that. But the issue is because of the nature of some of those moments, it's really hard to feel the loss of any of those characters. It's close to impossible to care for some of these characters when their deaths feel like Tom and Jerry bits. There's literally an opportunity for emotional reconciliation towards the end, but it gets squashed in the most funny and out of nowhere way possible. It just sucks when you realize that it's not the fault of the actors. They're trying to resonate on an emotional level, but it's like the movie itself is restricting them from being more. And ultimately, I worry people are gonna see this and say, well, what did you expect? It's a Final Destination movie. And I get that, but clearly it's trying to be more, and it can be more. It shouldn't be looked at as lesser just because of the slapstick nature of its predecessors. Regardless, this movie's still fun as hell. It would probably land somewhere in the middle in terms of quality in the franchise, at least for me. But that's it for me. I'd appreciate a thumbs up, subscribe, and sincerely yours, Anthony.